My job was to stay awake and guard Peta. She's tied up, no clothes on. I don't want to be a part of this, but I have no choice. Where were my choices? A snitch to my dad was the worst possible thing you could be. It's worse than murder in his mind, you know. If you did that, you're pretty much signing your death warrant. He's gonna come after you. You snitch, you die.
Awful, dreadful, black despair. I went to the doctor and said, I can't sleep. Could I have sleeping pills? And I remember the doctor saying, there is no medication for grief.
It was the front page, and it was them, this smiling out of the newspaper, and I just was rooted to the spot. That's not true. It's not them. Anything other than it had happened, and it was them.
They were dead and nothing was going to bring them back. I'd listened to Chris's tapes just to hear his voice.
Hello everyone, and happy birthday, Pen. I hope you like your birthday present. There's loads of different ways of tying a sarong, but if you can't work it, maybe you could go to the library and get a book on design and see how they do it. Happy birthday again. Bye now.
There was just a huge question mark. What had happened at sea? And why had it happened to my brother and Peter?
The finding of the bodies was on the 8th of July, which of course is only 8 days after they were last known to be alive at Hunting Cay on the 29th. The bodies were only visible because they were too near the surface. The ropes attaching to the weights were too long. That made it clear that they had been put in the sea from a boat. The only boat we knew they were ever on was the Justin B.
Peter and Chris had been with us for about 2 weeks, I think. The party had finished on Hunting Cay, and we were back on the water. Dad is still in the party mood. We're making him these Justin B's, and he's drinking them one after the other. It was Jamaican rum, cane sugar, honey, limes, coconut juice. He's, another Justin B, goddammit. At first, he was a party guy, happy-go-lucky, everything was great. But after drinking a few more drinks, he would kind of he would eventually hit a brick wall with his mood. He starts yelling at my brother, Russ, make me some fucking rice, Russ. Over and over. And Russ was trying to keep him happy, but there's no satisfying him when he's like that. Nothing was ever good enough for him. He tells Russ to go up on topside and pull the anchor. And Dad ambushes him. Just starts pummeling him for who knows what reason. Chris and Peter say, stop, enough. Leave him alone. Dad says, don't you fucking tell me how to raise my kids. Takes a swing at Chris. Chris ducks out of the way. Dad falls overboard. Dad's in the water. He's just glaring in silence, looking at Chris and Peta. I think Chris said something like, maybe that'll cool you off. Chris bends over, offers him a hand, and says, come on, back on board. You could tell he was very angry. I think that a line had been crossed. It's okay for him to humiliate us kids, but not for him to be humiliated. He says to us, we need to get rid of these people. I remember saying, oh shit, now what's going to happen? The next day, he tells them that he's going to drop them off in a little fishing village called Livingston in Guatemala. We make our way, not all the way into the port, but we drop anchor quite a ways out. And Dad says, okay, we don't have the proper visas for Guatemala. We have to wait until sunset. Then we'll pull in closer and then you guys can get off the boat. They seemed relieved that their part of the Justin B journey was going to be over. After a while, Dad tells Chris, go to the front and pull up anchor. We're going to pull in now. It's dark enough. Dad walks up behind him. He has a black billy club. He hits him over and over and over. He's bleeding and Chris is screaming, what's your game? What's your game? Dad just continues beating him until Chris just drops down on the deck. He hit him so hard, he broke his skull. I could hear the bones cracking, and eventually hit him so hard that he broke the billy club. I was thinking, what can I do? Can I intervene? But I'm just a skinny, scrawny kid. And then he pulls out a fillet knife. Stabs him in the chest. Peta pops her head up from the galley, and he threatens to shoot her with the with a spear gun if she doesn't stay down below deck. He grabs the rope and ties Chris up. Then he goes down in the galley with PETA. And the top hatch is covered. And he's down there for quite a while. For over an hour, I think. When he's finished, he comes back up. He hands me a Coleman lantern. He says, your job is to go down in the galley and keep an eye on PETA. She's tied up, no clothes on. He had taken her clothes off. She was seething mad, which she should have been. She must have had fear, but she wasn't showing it. She is telling me, you're going to burn in hell. And I'm thinking, maybe she's right. My mind is racing. I don't want to be a part of this, but I have no choice. Where were my choices? To try to overpower my dad? I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if that would have happened. I was just praying for the night to be over, that we could let them go in the morning like Dad said he was going to do. The next morning, all around us, there's dark water. Chris is still alive, tied up the front of the boat, hog-tied. PETA's at the aft of the boat. He has them tied like this, their hands, their wrists together, their ankles, their feet together, and then another connecting length of rope so they can't lift up. And Dad was telling them, I'm going to let you off, tie you to a tree, and then we're going to sail away. And that's what I thought was going to happen. Dad says, I'm going to put a plastic bag over your head. You'll still be able to breathe, but I don't want you to see exactly where we are. Couldn't see their faces, but I can imagine the terror. Dad goes below deck, grabs one of the large gears that was used for ballast. Looks like a giant cog made out of iron. And he doesn't just drop it, he eases it down behind Chris onto the deck. And then he walks back and does the same thing with PETA. He starts tying this connecting rope from their ankles and wrists onto this gear, this piece of machinery. You hope that he's not doing what you think he's going to do, but at that point he is unstoppable. He says, okay, I'm going to let you go now. We're right next to the shore. Which is not true. We're in the middle of the ocean. He tells them, everything's fine. We're here. Takes the weight, throws that over. And I'm thinking, this can't be happening. And my knees are just shaking, and Russ as well. And he takes Chris and rolls him off. I see Chris being yanked down very quickly. And then he just disappears into inky blackness. And you see bubbles rising up. PETA's screaming, what's going on? What's going on? Chris, are you okay? There was no answer. Dad takes her weight, throws that over, and then rolls her off the site. And then she just disappeared into the depths. He looked at his watch. A couple minutes later, he says, they're dead now. To watch your own father, someone that you trust that's supposed to be protecting you, murdering two innocent people in front of your own eyes. And thinking, maybe we're next. And he looked at us and said, you snitch, you die. And I knew he meant it. No one talked for a while. And we just kept sailing.
After their bodies were found, we were just living with the fact that Chris had been tortured, murdered, but we didn't know why. Dad could only think that Boston was the culprit. Who else could it have been? But there was no evidence to prove that.
I already knew from the inquiries that Boston was not the ordinary law-abiding citizen. Quite the contrary, in fact. His wife disappeared in 1968 under strange circumstances. There was no evidence that she was still alive. And he was suspected of being involved in her disappearance. So that raised suspicions even more. I was convinced that Boston had murdered them.
We go back to Sacramento, Roseville, where my grandma lived, having a hard time sleeping, having a lot of nightmares. I would be swimming and something would grab me on the ankles and start pulling me down. And waking up in a cold sweat and just reliving that over and over and over. My grandma asked me, what's wrong? I know there's something wrong, tell me. And I trusted her. So I told her exactly what happened. The people that he murdered in front of my brother and I, and she was horrified. And she's like, do not talk about things like that. If they find out that your dad did it, you'll never see him again. You'll be an orphan. She never reported him or turned him in. She knew that he was killing people. And she already knew about my mom. She told us. She told us when we were like little kids. It was around Christmas time. She's like, you know, I don't want to lie to you kids. There is no Santa Claus. I'm the one buying these presents. Also, you're never going to see your mom again. And we're like, why? It's like, well, let me tell you, you know, your dad killed your mom. He shot her. She said that he murdered my mom when she wanted to take us away and divorce him. My grandma helped cover it up, and years later, here it is again. She's protecting him again. Would she have ever told on her son? Never, ever. Everyone knew about it, but no one would do anything against my dad. The man that's supposed to protect you is also your worst enemy. He killed your mother, and he's gotten away with it. And he lets you know over and over that you are worthless, and if you snitch on him, that he would easily end your life. It's not a big deal to him. Coming to that realization as a child, it is a pretty scary thing. And you realize that you don't have anyone that loves you, and you can't trust anyone, especially your own parent. And that's the reality of it.
I wanted Boston. I would have just loved to put my hand on his shoulder, but that couldn't be, of course. He had disappeared.
All throughout 1980, there was nothing, absolute nothing. Boston couldn't be found. He just went on the run. Next thing we heard was in February 1981, Boston had come back onto the radar in California. He was arrested for the abduction of one of his children, a 4-year-old, that wasn't on the boat. It was great. We really felt confident that the case was moving forward.
My name is Jim Kelly. I was the detective sergeant with the San Rafael, California Police Department. My specific caseload was crimes against children. Dealing with kids, dealing with parents, dealing with schools. I received a message from Interpol. Boston was a suspect in a double homicide, and that the Greater Manchester Police in England were investigating this. Wow. This is more than I could ever have anticipated or expected.
It was during the questioning about the child abduction that Sergeant Jim Kelly questioned him about Chris and Peter.
I had a very thick binder, and the binder was labeled, homicides, and it had the names of the 2 victims. And he took one look at the binder, and his entire composure changed. He sat back and he looked at me and he said, "Oh, now I know why you guys have made such a big deal out of this. I have to get as much information out of him as I can for the Greater Manchester Police and the family of the victims." So I started up basically saying that, "Tell me about this trip. Tell me about these people on your boat. Tell me where you went." He said he first met them in a hotel in Belize. He agreed to take them on his boat, but he told me they were deadbeats. And he claims that during the voyage, Peter Frampton was consuming what he described as a lot of alcohol, and that Chris Farmer was injecting some type of drugs into his arm with a needle. I knew that Boston had made these allegations before. There was no evidence that Chris and Peter were ever involved in the drug trade. This is Silas Boston throwing me a cookie that he thinks I'm going to go chase. And he said that a boat came along with what he described as 2 natives. He didn't explain why, but he said that the victims got on this boat with the natives. That was his story. He was very elusive, evasive about any specific dates, times, but when it came to his arrival in Livingston, Guatemala, he all of a sudden knew the exact date, July 16th, 1978. He said, "I think I saw them when I was there." I don't think he knew at this point that the bodies had been found. Peter Frampton's parents had received a letter that was postmarked in Livingston, July 18th. Chris and Petta's bodies were found on July 8th. They couldn't have posted the letter. So who did? I leaned across the table and I looked at him and I said, "Did you kill Chris Farmer and Petta Frampton?" Instead of saying no, he looked at me with his head cocked and he has the darkest, beadiest little eyes that I've ever seen. And he said, "I told you. The last time I thought I saw them was in Livingston on July 16th. That told me right there, this guy did it. He was responsible for these 2 homicides. He just wouldn't admit it." I knew he was guilty, but I had no hold on Silas Twain Boston. I had no legal right to detain him. I couldn't do anything about the homicides. I sent a full report to Interpol asking them to forward it to the Greater Manchester Police. So Silas Twain Boston was at that point a free man with no charges pending.
We were just left questioning what the hell was going on, really. How could he just be released? My parents were adamant that attempts should be made to talk to the 2 boys.
Interviewing Russell and Vincent was key. They would have been the only witnesses to the homicides. But no one knew where they were. And without them, we had no evidence.
We couldn't understand why no one was doing anything. Even David Sachs had been taken off the case.
Every day that went by, the case just went colder and colder.
The Assistant Chief Constable in Manchester rang up and said that he'd got a photograph of Boston and would I like to see it. And I remember this guy saying to me, "We know that this chap did it, but we can't pin it on him."
It was just like a bomb had exploded in our family, and we were left to pick up the pieces without any answers. The most distressing thing I've ever heard my mother say was the best part of her life was now over.
Obviously, it was very traumatic for her. I don't think I'd entirely realised at the time. I was quite involved in my own distress. I used to write long letters to him. Every birthday, every Christmas. Just really telling him how I felt, how we missed him. Although it was senseless, really. It was a sort of a continuation as though he was still alive.
How long did you do that for?
4 years. 4 years.
I never forgot what happened on the boat. I just wanted to get away. When I was 17, I joined the Navy. I felt a little bit of freedom away from the craziness of the Boston crime family. I knew that Chris and Peter had loved ones somewhere in England. The way I felt about my mom is I would want to know every detail what happened. I figured that they would want to know the same. My brother and I were eyewitnesses to the murders. I've got to do something. I've got to try. I took it upon myself to try to call the police in Great Britain called Scotland Yard. I said that my brother witnessed my dad murdering 2 people, 2 British citizens, Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton. But it was such an unusual coincidence that at that time, Peter Frampton was one of the biggest stars in the world, the singer, and she had the same name. I thought they thought I was a kook.
Dad never ever spoke about Chris, really. But, sorry. But, you know, when I was getting married, he just said...
There's only just one little thing we're very sorry about. That is that Penny's brother, Christopher, couldn't be with us.
And that just completely set me off. It would have been so nice to have had Chris there. Life does move on, and you do paper over the cracks. But it's always in the shadows. It's never very far from the surface.
I left the Navy and became an engineer. I never stopped thinking about my mom. I wanted to find where she was buried, you know, and bring her home. But it seemed like every time I would reach out, I was being ignored or pushed aside. And it's like, how come these people aren't taking these murders seriously? But I refused to give up. My brother, Russell, refused to give up as well.
In January of 1999, I received a telephone call, and I was informed that Russell Boston had publicly revealed that he did witness his father murder Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton. Yes, I got him. I got him. I sent a letter to Interpol in Washington, and I thought, if I get the permission from the Greater Manchester Police to interview one or both of those boys, I would have run with that faster than the wind. I never received any kind of a reply.
There was never really anyone that was in charge of the case fully, both in America and over here. When the internet arrived in 2001, Dad was writing emails to law enforcement agencies looking for Dwayne Boston and his two sons.
In 2012, I wanted to reach out again. I didn't want to give up. I got a hold of the Sacramento Police Department, sent all the information that I could about the murder. I hadn't talked to my dad for years and years. He thought he was going to get away with it, and I wanted to make him accountable for his crimes. Sacramento Police Department spent a lot of time talking to FBI and Interpol and British authorities. I felt that was the first time I was being taken seriously. But they just kept hitting a brick wall. No one could find any record of Chris and Peter. They told me, be patient, and I had very little patience. It's like, why can't they find them? How long do we have to wait?
Dad was haunted by Chris's death because it was so inexplicable. He died in 2013, still not knowing what happened to his son.
Your parents you expect to lose, but not your kids. And you never really get over that.
Birthdays and anniversaries came and went, Mum reaching 90, and Chris was not there. One day, Mum turns to me and says, I wonder what Chris would have looked like now. He would have been 62, but he's forever young in our eyes, isn't he? I stopped dead and I literally run home. Why have I not looked for these people on the internet before?
She found him just like that. It was quite extraordinary.
Just could not believe that I am looking at the person who we have always felt held the key to their disappearance and murders. It's just mind-blowing. I look at his posts and I can see that he's referenced a news link, and it's presented as a miracle of God that the occupant is able to escape drowning. I'm thinking, well, is there a link there to Chris and Peter's drowning? I can see that he's friends with Russell, but not with Vince. Why isn't he friends with his elder son? I put in Vince Boston. I can see posts about his mother, Mary Lou. She disappeared back in 1968. Vince made a reference to his mother being killed by shotgun. My eyes are out on stalks at this point. Just could not believe that the very people that we have been searching for nearly 4 decades are there in front of me on my computer screen. I felt angry. They have possibly watched my brother and his girlfriend be murdered and never told anybody. We need to get in touch with them urgently. I messaged Vince and Russell from an anonymous Facebook account, which I had created to just keep an eye on my 3 teenage kids. Were you on the Justin Bee back in 1978 with my brother and his girlfriend? Please reply. I want some information. I think you know what happened on that boat. I'm not going to let this go. He's my brother's killer. And he's out. And he's free.
Penny called the cold case unit, and I was the detective who picked up the phone. It was just unbelievable. She was convinced that she had found the suspect, Silas Dwayne Boston, and his 2 sons who were on the boat. She wanted us to go and arrest him right away. But when I searched for the case on our records within GMP, I found absolutely nothing, no trace whatsoever.
We find that unbelievable. Not a scrap of anything from the 70s or 80s, just nothing in the archives.
Audrey Farmer remembered the name of the police officer that had conducted the investigation back in the 1970s. I rang him the same day.
Michaela explained to me that they couldn't find any documentation. How that could conceivably happen just defeated me. I said, hang on a minute, I've got a complete copy of everything in my garden shed.
There in David's files, we had court records, official documents naming the people on the boat. We've got the autopsies, dental records, Pete's last letter, all sorts of valuable evidence. Now we can run with this.
Greater Manchester Police contacted Interpol and got a response immediately.
A police officer in the Sacramento Police Department was looking at Silas Dwayne Boston. She'd interviewed Vince in relation to the disappearance of his mother. He'd told her that he'd witnessed his dad murder a young couple on the boat.
We were called to Greater Manchester Police. They had Vince and Russell's statements. I couldn't get my head around it. After 4 decades of silence, of not knowing, we were finally going to find out the truth.
They wanted to spare us some of the more grisly details, but it wouldn't have been complete without knowing, really.
The information we received that afternoon was horrendous. We came out stunned and shell-shocked.
You often wonder what their last words were, but that's inevitable.
They were alive when they went into the water. I just keep thinking, what was she thinking? What was she thinking?
He just completely destroyed them. And the fact that those 2 boys had to witness that, it was horrendous.
For years we were told that the boys had been hiding from the police, and that wasn't true, of course, at all.
Vince and Russell, particularly Vince, did try to do something. But Greater Manchester Police closed the case down. So every time the phone call came into this country from California, it was like somebody was filing it in a bin. Nobody was investigating Boston. It's mind-blowing, really.
They said, we'll never let the case close. And of course they did. That's just what they did. So wrong. So terribly wrong.
Finally, things are progressing, and the wheels were turning. I wanted justice for my mom and Chris and Peter.
Here we were, opposite sides of the Atlantic, both looking at the case. There was no way that I was going to let Boston slip away again. We were told that the FBI have enough evidence against him, and he was going to be arrested.
My dad committed these crimes, and he deserved to face judgment.
How could anybody do what he did to Chris and Pete? We'll never rest until Boston's in prison.
I figured the sooner an arrest, the better. Then all of a sudden, my dad reached out to me on Facebook. Hey, dude, what's up? I'm thinking, what is going on? What is he thinking? Does he know? I can imagine him thinking, that little fucking snitch. Wait till I get my hands on him.
Well, good morning, Sacramento. If you're just joining us, it's 8:38 a.m. It's a beautiful day out there, but make the most of it. Things look set to heat up dramatically.
Finally, after all these years, we're getting something done. And I guess my patience finally paid off. I had told the police that, my brother witnessed my dad murdering Chris and Peta. I was prepared to just give my testimony, but I knew I was putting my life in my hands. He can kill you, he can bury you in the backyard, and he's gotten away with it more than once. Yeah, I'm looking over my shoulder, but I have to make my dad accountable for his crimes and stop him from hurting somebody else.
We just couldn't believe that we were in this position after so many decades. The FBI had tracked Boston down.
We obtained information that he was staying at a senior care facility in Eureka, California.
I was very vengeful. I wanted my pound of flesh off him. He was age 75, and all this time, he was still a free man.
We were going to arrest Silas Dwayne Boston for the homicides of Peta and Chris.
This guy has killed multiple people before, and I wasn't going to take it lightly.
We felt that justice was within our grasp.
We go to his room. And he's not there.
I don't think he can be caught. He covers his tracks too well.
My heart started beating. He's got away again.
It made me sick to my stomach. Because I'm the snitch. He might be trying to find me to come and kill me.
Where is he? We were assured he'd been under surveillance and that there is no way he can move anywhere.
We determined that 2 days prior to us arriving in Eureka, he had transferred to another senior care facility in Paradise, California. We are flying along Highway 36, probably 4 or 5 hour drive.
We felt he'd slipped away again, and we were not going to see justice again.
Our concern is we don't know if the nurse is calling over there, and we don't want him to go on the run. I come around the corner, and sitting there in a wheelchair, kind of moving himself with his legs, is Dwayne. You could see his eyes just got big.
We tell him that he's under arrest for the murders of Chris Farmer and Peta Frampton.
He really didn't say anything. If you didn't know what he had done to Peta and Chris, you'd be like, oh, that just looks like a nice old guy sitting there in a wheelchair. But you just feel kind of a coldness that was there. He was a bad guy that needed to go to jail. This was a win for Peta and Chris.
75-year-old Silas Dwayne Boston was tracked down by the FBI and arrested in a Paradise convalescent home.
Charged with murdering a young Manchester couple in Guatemala nearly 40 years ago.
Christopher Farmer and Peter Frampton from Manchester, a boyfriend-girlfriend. They'd just finished at university. They were celebrating their graduation with a round-the-world trip.
Both Farmer and Frampton were tortured and hogtied, thrown in the middle of the ocean to drown.
The case would go cold for nearly 4 decades.
Someone from England had the original file in their garden shed. You know, I mean, does it get better than that?
Yes. Got you. You black-hearted bastard.
Silas Dwayne Boston was arrested after Greater Manchester Police reopened the case at the request of the victims' families.
I went downstairs to tell Mum the good news. After 38 very long years, he was finally in custody. We opened a bottle of champagne and raised a glass to Chris and Peter.
Over 30 years of silence. I know what it meant to Charles to know he was arrested. He'd always begged the police to let us speak to the 2 boys.
Once again, the case came alive. Everything changed. He's under arrest, he's in custody. Now it's actually going to happen.
When I saw that mugshot for the first time, it was shocking. Because I hadn't seen him in so many years. He didn't look the same. I always knew that there was a monster beneath the mask, but now it's like the mask has been lifted. I felt physically ill. I couldn't look at it.
At the time of the murders, Russell and Vince were 11 and 13, but in interviews this year, they told an FBI agent they saw their father kill the couple.
We were very grateful that the boys were prepared to get onto the witness stand and testify against their father.
I had felt very antagonistic towards the boys, but then I hadn't realised they were obviously scared stiff of him.
If he's found guilty of killing Frampton and Farmer, he'll face the death penalty or life in prison.
So how do you feel? We got him. Hooray, you know? Let's jump cartwheels and, you know, slap high fives all around. It was a relief of a huge burden. I didn't want to be afraid anymore. But I felt these mixed emotions. I'm the one that's started the machinery to put him to his death. That's my dad, you know. I'm killing my dad. The good guy with the bad guy. You can't separate the two.
It's an extraordinary story, this, isn't it? A young couple from Manchester disappear nearly 40 years ago, and now finally the law authorities in the United States believe that they do know how they were killed, how they were murdered, and who was responsible.
We wanted the world to know he was guilty. But I was aware that being arrested didn't mean that he was convicted. We knew we were in for a long and messy trial. All our faith and hope was put in Matt Seagal, the prosecutor.
In 2015, I was the chief of the Special Prosecutions Unit of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of California. This was an extraordinary case. 2 people were murdered, and the man who did it evaded justice for 38 years. And his 2 sons say that they saw him kill them. You can't kill people. And if there's a prosecutable case of murder, it has to be charged.
It's in the United States Constitution that people are entitled to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm a federal public defender, and I was appointed to represent Dwayne Boston in the case against him. I became a public defender because I wanted to represent people who didn't have the money to hire, fancy attorneys.
The defense attorney is straight out of central casting for your federal public defender with a lot of experience and smarts.
My job is to hold the government's feet to the fire, and I have absolutely no problem fighting that fight. They're innocent until proven guilty, and I believe in that very strongly. If you were accused of something, you would want me to represent you that way.
I was glad that he was going to get the best representation. It was a serious accusation, but we were going to go 100% no matter who was representing him. Right, like, you can't just lock people up. A jury of 12 regular people has to decide beyond a reasonable doubt, yeah, that happened, he did it.
I only need one juror to have a doubt.
Could we face the awful thought of getting an innocent verdict?
Any seed of doubt in the story, one little chink in the armor, and he's walking out.
I start reading the complaint, and it's a much stranger complaint than normal. To have a homicide case from the 1970s was incredibly unusual. To have a case that took place in allegedly Guatemala was highly unusual. And Vincent and Russell's story is very compelling, and it seems true on the surface. But when the story is being told with such creative details, it just doesn't ring true as people who are telling something 30 years later that actually happened.
They corroborate each other. They're telling substantially the same story about what they saw because that is what they saw.
The words that were spoken, supposedly Chris saying, "What's your game, man? What's your game?" The billy club broke after the beating. Even sitting with the naked person tied up below, none of it read to me like facts of a case. Those kind of details actually raise a red flag to me as being untruthful. When something very traumatic happens, your brain goes to places to protect you, and you sometimes can't remember details or can't even see details. There's a lot of studies about eyewitness identifications of traumatic events where one person's telling of it is completely different from another person's telling because their brains are just working in ways to protect them from this trauma. Neither one of the boys said, "It's been a really long time. I was very traumatized by it. I put it out of my mind or I repressed it, and so I don't really remember, but I know I saw this thing happen." If there's no contemporaneous writing or contemporaneous way of recording, people just don't remember those things.
The mind's not a tape recorder, and memory's sometimes not exactly valid. But all I can do is tell the story of what I saw in front of my own eyes.
Any effective defense would require a cross-examination for the ages of those guys.
The motive for Russell and Vincent to lie about their dad was very apparent to me. I mean, that was something that just kind of screamed off the page. The boys were convinced from a very young age that their father had killed their mother.
Everyone knows he's killed her. I'm going to tell you exactly what he did to my mom. The earliest memories I have of our mom, she was in the kitchen playing the Beatles. That was one of her favorite groups. Somehow we started calling her Mommy Mary Lou. And I just remember this warm feeling that She loved us kids, and we were her whole world. When she met my dad, she was 17, which is still considered a minor, and my dad was a few years older. The story was she ran away with him with $25 in her pocket. It scared her family, but she had fallen for Dad. Dad could be very charming if he wanted to be, especially over women. At first, he was a caring dad, but he turned. He was doing drugs and partying and eventually being abusive. She had to get away from him. She started dating someone and filed for a divorce, but he wouldn't let her leave. He took her to an orchard and told her he was going to shoot her. While she was running, he shot her in the back. That he buried her in a shallow grave somewhere. We don't know where. Grandma told us, your dad showed me his hands. He had blisters on his hands from digging her grave. And he was crying and saying, I had to kill Mary. I had to shoot her because she was going to leave me and I didn't want to lose my kids. When she went missing, the police questioned my dad. He said that they were separated. She had emptied the savings account and she was dating this radio disc jockey. And he never saw her again. I think at the time, in the late 60s, a woman was thought that she should be in the kitchen, just not date anybody else when she's getting a divorce. It's like, hey, you know, she's going on with her life. She was getting away from his abuse. What were they thinking back then? He killed my mom in cold blood. They just took everything he said, this is the truth. They let him go. And then meanwhile, my mom's in a shallow grave somewhere. We haven't been able to find out where my mom is. My dad actually told us himself they will never find her in a million years, and that he buried her in or near a creek bed, and the creek bed caved in on her. Where could he have taken her? He told us that he loved my mom, and that of all the people that he killed, she's the only one he regrets killing. When you murder somebody's mother for your own selfish needs and say, I did it because I love you, really, is that love? You sicken me. I think this was the first time he was able to commit a murder and talk his way out of it. And I think it set things up for the future for him, realizing that if he did things a certain way, he could get away with murder over and over again.
When somebody's missing, it's horrible. You can't think about anything else. You can't come to terms with it.
Desperate. Absolutely desperate. You don't know what to do. You don't know who to turn to.
I think it's human nature to want to know what happened, to get some kind of a closure, even though you know they can't come back. If my dad's convicted, he might finally tell me where he buried my mom.
Vincent spent a tremendous amount of effort trying to get them to reopen the investigation into their mother's disappearance. It's unclear whether she died. They never found a body, and they just simply weren't getting any traction there. They were told by family members from a young age that Pitta and Chris had gone missing and that they had last been on the boat, and that police officers were investigating Mr. Boston. So they know he's a suspect in this. The story of Kristen Peta was always told in combination with, let's find him responsible for killing our mother. I'm looking for an opportunity to raise doubt about their credibility. In this case, I'm very confident that I have a lot to say.
The attack on Vince and Russ is, you just made this up to get back at your dad because you think he murdered your mom, which is crazy in itself as a defense. So now Dwayne looks like a 3 times murderer who, when he kills, does his best to dispose of the bodies in a way that they'll never be found. So it's a tough position for the defense, in my opinion.
It's very problematic for me, except I think the way I would do that is I would cross-examine and say, you believe that your father was responsible for killing your mother. You know that he was cleared of doing that, and that made you angry. You believed in your heart that that's what happened because that's what your grandmother told you.
Why did your grandma tell you that?
Maybe in her mind, she felt some guilt. And even though she would never turn in little Dwayne, her son, her baby, she wanted us to know the truth. She knew that he was killing people. She would chastise him. Dwayne, you can't be doing that. But she would tell us kids, you gotta keep the family circle intact.
That's why he committed so many crimes and got away with them. During this investigation back in 1981, I know that his father knew where he was, but his father enabled him by concealing him.
My grandpa pretty much funded the trip down to Mexico and Belize because Dad was facing charges for statutory rape. I remember one night, I woke up and heard a young woman in distress. It wasn't unusual for him to bring home ladies, but this was different. And she was saying, just stop, no, please stop, and a crying voice. The next morning, he's like, hey, about last night, dummy up, shut the fuck up about that. This young lady was under the age of consent, so they were able to press charges of statutory rape against my dad. Next thing we know, he went and got his passports and headed down to Belize. A few weeks later, Grandpa came down and brought us money and bought us a boat. The Justin B. The rape charges were dropped for whatever reason. I don't know. Grandpa knew, but he didn't tell Dad. I think that if Dad knew, we would have come back home.
It was just so galling to think if Boston had been told, he wouldn't have met Chris and Peter.
You just think, I wish you'd never been there, you know. Their paths crossing the way they did.
They were lambs to the slaughter.
Dwayne was deep in this Western outlaw culture, doing crime, not talking about it, and he conveyed a lot of that forcefully for decades to his sons. It was a really big deal when they finally told the police what their dad had done.
It restored your faith in humanity that they had tried to do something. They hadn't replicated his grotesque human nature, if you can call him human.
He's an evil guy that's actively killing people and hurting people. In my mind, he committed these crimes and he deserved to face judgment, even if it was 20, 30, 40, 50 years later.
Obviously, in a modern case, we'd want to see photographs. We'd want to see that rope. We would want to see, how their hands were bound. And a modern autopsy would document all of those things. The evidence we had was very old documents, lots of dead witnesses. We didn't have the autopsy report. And there's no DNA, which was strange to me. The last time the bodies were seen was in the 70s. By the records of the exhumation, they put the bodies under marked grave markers in Guatemala. This makes the case very strong if they have those bodies and they have DNA. I assume it's coming.
We sent some agents down to Guatemala to locate the graves of Chris and Peta. We had planned to exhume the skeletons and send those up to the FBI laboratory to be held for trial.
I was told it's really important because then it will give us the DNA match to yours. That cemetery was very chaotic and it was proving very hard.
Unfortunately, they couldn't find the grave sites. I was extremely disappointed they couldn't make that happen.
We were horrified. There were photographs of their graves, and it was a very well documented and witnessed exhumation. This was really worrying.
It's very complex to decide that those bodies are Peta and Chris without DNA testing. Peta and Chris could have gotten off the boat and something could have happened to them after. I don't have to prove anything. I just raise reasonable doubt.
If we could have recovered a body from that cemetery, gotten DNA out of it, and matched it to the families, then we would have absolutely known in a completely incontrovertible way. But I just keep returning to the fact that we had two eyeball witnesses to these murders. They corroborated each other, and they are corroborated by documents. There's a Belize port document that Charles Farmer got that says, hey, who was on the boat? It was Dwayne, Chris, Peta, Russ, and Vince. But Chris and Peta weren't on the boat when they got to Livingston. And we knew we had something when we had Peta's letter.
13th of June, 1978. Dear Mum, all our plans have changed. An American called Dwayne, who owns a Belizean boat called the Justin B, offered to take us up to Chetumal by sail. We thought it was an opportunity not to be missed, especially as Chris wants sailing experience.
It puts her on the boat, the Justin B. It puts her with Dwayne and two kids. It's almost like she was speaking to us. Then the letter is posted on July 18th. That was about a week after the bodies washed up. So it wasn't Peta who sent that letter.
I remember Dad looking at the envelope. If he mails it, then that gives them a few extra days. Because then they think, oh, they're still alive. He ended up mailing it in Livingston.
And then, turns out that Boston saved a lot of stuff over time.
My dad kept Chris's cassette tapes. Russ found them in my dad's belongings and handed them over to the police.
It was horrible that Boston had kept hold of Chris's much-loved music tapes that he'd cherished and put together from all his vinyl records. It was just a further violation.
That's powerful circumstantial evidence. And if the jury believes the two sons, the only verdict is guilty, because they are eyeball witnesses to the murders.
I was ready for it. I can't get wrapped up in if I'm going to be attacked personally or discredited or thrown under the bus. All I could do is tell the truth and be the best witness I could be. Bring it on. I have the truth on my side.
Boston had been in custody for 2 months at this point. We were just absolutely desperate to get to trial. We were worried. They couldn't find the bodies. But we felt we had a very strong case because of Vince and Russell's testimonies, and that we would win. We were asked if we wanted to seek the death penalty, and my mother, really without hesitation, said no.
There's something absolutely abhorrent about legal death. Although, he'd done unspeakable things, I don't think that killing somebody really solves anything.
We wanted to go quickly so we could get a conviction before anything happened to Audrey. But the government's not in charge of that. The court is. And so we had to persuade the court to set a speedy trial. We ended up in district court before the trial judge.
The 75-year-old who wheeled into a Sacramento federal courtroom this afternoon seemed feeble and needed a listening device to hear court proceedings. But the Silas Dwayne Boston described in this federal complaint was anything but weak 38 years ago.
When I saw Boston come into the courtroom for the first time, I noticed how awful he looked.
He was obviously very ill, and we could see that before our eyes. He was in a wheelchair. He's on medication. He was losing weight already. I mean, he was a very sick man.
If we were the last stop to being able to deliver justice for a double murder, then that had to happen. But the defense is trying to delay trial.
We just couldn't commit to a sooner trial when we're not ready. If we needed attorney-client time with him to get the case together, he was going to have to be a little bit healthy.
My mum wrote a letter to the judge.
Dear Sir, I'm writing to ask if you will please consider setting a date as soon as possible for the trial of Silas Dwayne Boston for the murder of my beloved son, Dr. Christopher Palmer, and his girlfriend, Peter Frampton. The brutal manner in which my son's life was taken has left an enduring and very painful gap in my family's life, which no amount of time will heal. But I will derive a sense of closure from knowing that his killer has been apprehended and appropriately sentenced.
We were given a provisional trial date of October the 2nd, and we couldn't wait to face him in court.
I was hoping every day that I would get that call telling me, be in this Sacramento court on this date at this time, and I was ready. I would leave in a heartbeat.
I wanted to look him in the eye across the courtroom and convey an unspoken message to him, got you.
All I kept thinking is, how are they going to secure a conviction? Will they be able to provide unequivocal evidence? Will the jury decide to find him guilty? He has to be guilty. I just wanted to kill him.
Mum was 92. I think she felt it was the last thing she could do for Chris to stand in that courtroom and face Boston.
I want to draw a line under it.
After all these years.
We'd finally got him.
Now let's go convict him.
You get a call. Your dad has passed away. He just died in custody. And my head just starts spinning.
The message came through about 2 o'clock in the morning. It just said, Silas Dwayne Boston has died. I went and woke Mum up and just said he's dead. It was just so depressing. We were powerless again.
When the suspect died in jail before standing trial, what impact did that have on you and your family?
We were devastated. It was just a further blow. We came 2 weeks away from going over to Sacramento to give pre-trial evidence, and he effectively exited life on his own terms. He didn't want us to have justice. We were told by his medical team that he refused food and his medicine. So in effect, he took his life. He knew that we knew he'd killed them. He couldn't face us. 4 months in custody doesn't really equate to the 4 decades where we didn't know what had happened.
I knew that this case had been ever present in their moment-to-moment daily lives, but criminal cases and criminal trials do not necessarily bring people any peace. He might not have been convicted, and then what? Do you have your peace? Do you have your closure, even though there's no jury conviction?
I'm disappointed. It would have been a great, great trial, but what happened to him was always what I had planned for the case, in the sense that he didn't walk free again post-arrest. His sons were essential in providing what justice we could provide in this case.
Death is pretty permanent. There's no coming back from that. No matter what feelings I had toward him, this was a finality, a chapter closing. He's never going to be on this planet again. This evil monster is gone. I remember we'd go to the parks here in Sacramento and fly kites, and he tied the kite onto a fishing line. And it got so high in the air that it was just a little dot. And he's like, whoa, that's the highest kite in the world. And we're like, yay, it's pretty cool. He wasn't always bad. He wasn't always a horrible person. And that's what made it rough. If he was an asshole all the time, it'd be easy to deal with. But when it's just confusing as a child. It's like, this is a cool dad that you want to bond with. But you know what he's capable of.
The evil that he did, it had such a reach. Not just for my family, but the Bramptons and his own family.
A lot of people have suffered. Everybody that could have known my mom. She's an amazing artist. She could have shared that art with the world. Or Chris was a doctor, 25 years old. Think of all the lives that he could have saved. Peta was an attorney. Think of all the people that she could have helped. And it's not just that one person, it's everybody in their circle.
I can remember Chris was about 12. We were out for a walk, and I had a moment of complete happiness. He and I were walking hand in hand, and I thought, you know, how lovely life is. I do remember that, when we were just the two of us together. It was a fleeting moment, and I don't think I've ever quite experienced that again.
Boston never gave Vince and Russell the satisfaction of knowing where he'd buried Mary Lou.
I'll forever have the pain of losing my mom. I am trying to find her so I can bring her home. As human beings, we want that closure, letting her rest in peace instead of buried like trash in a shallow grave somewhere. Maybe it's beautiful, maybe it's picturesque if there's a river there and mountains or something. But there's an unexplainable feeling of wanting to know where she is.
Even now, I still feel that there's somebody missing.
Do you think one of your ways of coping was this fight for justice?
Oh, absolutely. Law enforcement failed us time and time again. Our family was the only point of cohesion, the only constant.
Now to an update on a story which we have reported on Northwest Tonight several times in the past. The murders of the Manchester couple Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton on a yacht 40 years ago in Guatemala.
Well, their families were told their remains had been lost forever, and even the FBI couldn't find them. But new clues led Chris's sister to a remote graveyard.
When you lose somebody, the most devastating thing is everybody else forgets them, but you don't, and you don't want to.
What survives after death is love. As a hurt party, you want justice. It doesn't make amends, but you at least feel that you have done everything you can to have avenged their murders.
Found him! Found Chris!
That's amazing.
Just extraordinary, isn't it?
I was just amazed to find them. It was such a relief. Boston never counted on us having the fortitude and strength and love to fight back for Chris and Peter. He thought they would be just forgotten and disappear into that ocean, never to be seen again. But how wrong was he? They will live on in a different sort of way, in a different plane. I keep having this recurring dream about my brother Chris coming back and being really, really happy. We have a party to celebrate. After the party, I go into the bedroom to go and sit on his bed and talk. And I discovered a mask of his face lying on the bedside table. But it isn't really him.
I don't think anybody could imagine what a terrible sense of absolute despair there was of not knowing what had happened to my son.
It just didn't make sense. It didn't add up. Where could they be? We knew that somebody somewhere knew the truth.
It's like watching a horror movie, but it's real. You feel like you're hiding this secret that people would not understand. And what happened to Peter and Chris is a nightmare that you can't wake up from.
My brother, Chris, and his girlfriend, Peter, always wanted to travel, always.
Hello everyone. What's the date today? It's the 29th of May.
Chris had a tape recorder, so he would send tapes back.
Greetings from Dateline. It's basically paradise. The markets are quite lively places. We're going to travel down the coast.
Chris was my cool older brother. There were three of us. Nigel was the oldest, I was the youngest, and Chris was in the middle, and I idolised him, I suppose. My father hated Chris's long hair. They often locked horns, but Chris really didn't care what other people thought of him. You know, loved his leather jacket, loved wearing silver boots, jeans, and you could never really hold him back. He hated boundaries.
He was a very lovable little boy. There was always a sense of excitement about him. From the age of 10, he decided to be a doctor. I was always very proud of him. He was very devoted to his girlfriend, Peter.
Chris and Peter met when they were 14 and became childhood sweethearts.
I met Peter in 1964 when we were 11. She had this Mona Lisa smile, very reserved, but underneath that exterior was this mischievous character, this twinkle in her eye. Soul music was the big thing. We loved it. She would go mental. That's what I loved about her, that sense of fun. And then Chris came along. They seemed to belong together.
He was probably not your conventional doctor. He was very much a party animal, and they were quite well known, I think, for their parties. They were adventurous, and they thought nothing of just getting in Chris's old banger of a car and just taking off, and they did. You know, they travelled across Europe and to Morocco and Tangier. They went to Australia and worked there for 6 months and then travelled down to Central America.
Well, I didn't like it at all. I mean, I don't think many parents would. Wasn't even too sure where Central America was, to be honest. But you can't clip a kid's wings. You've got to let them fly. So they went off with our blessings.
June 1978. Dear Mum, I'm now in Sardinia on the north coast of Belize.
Peter always wrote long letters to her mother, usually fortnightly, maybe more often.
Life is very slow here, and we shall probably stay until the end of the week. The sun is warm, the sky is a little cloudy, and the sea is emerald green.
People are very friendly indeed, you know. You've got fish in the sea. You've got all your fruit and vegetables growing behind you in the jungle. We heard stories of people who've gone out there just for a couple of weeks and ended up staying 2 or 3 months.
It was always very exciting hearing from them. These were strange places to us. For me, back at home, little 17-year-old, it all seemed very exciting and exotic.
That type of travel was unusual. They were going to completely foreign places, right out of your comfort zone.
Chris was a risk taker. He did go beyond what people would accept as being safe.
After that, still not quite sure. Might be going to Jamaica, might be going down to Peru.
You know, they were all over the place, really, depending on who they met. You know, it was all at a whim. Always looking for the next new experience. They were very much children of the 70s. That whole buzz, that whole vibe, you know, free love and the music. But, you know, I think what came with that was a certain naivety. They couldn't conceive that anybody could harm them. 13th of June, 1978. All our plans have changed. An American called Dwayne offered to take us up to Chetumal by sail. We thought it was an opportunity not to be missed, especially as Chris wants sailing experience. No more news, I don't think, so we'll close now with all my love as ever. Pete.
We knew that in one of the bars in Belize, they'd met this man, Dwayne, Boston. They were going to sail with him down the coast. He had 2 boys in tow, Russell and Vince.
Can you tell me your name?
My name is Vince Boston. I had a weird childhood. We moved around a lot. We never stayed in one place for like more than a year. I hadn't seen my mom since I was 3, almost 4 years old. So it was my brother Russ, me, and my dad, Silas Dwayne Boston, but everyone called him Dwayne. We had a lot of girlfriends, a lot of really good-looking women. He had that certain charisma, I guess, you know. They call it the Boston charm. I don't know, whatever. I think the best way to describe my dad is he acts like a big kid. 0 responsibilities. Just wants to have fun and party and good times, you know. There's always these hippies in the house smoking pot, drinking, doing drugs. You know, we'd be sitting there in the living room and somebody would pass a joint over and I'd take a little hit. And the dad didn't care. He's like, yeah, you know, it's good for him. Fuck him. I remember one Christmas, we had a little Charlie Brown Christmas tree. Scrawny, but oh well, and we decorated it. We had Fruit Loops. We strung those through a thread. Christmas morning, under the tree, there was a brown paper bag. I opened it up, was this Viewmaster. You put these reels in and put a little cartridge thing to your eyes. You saw this amazing full-color picture from 3 dimensions. And it was from Dad. It just meant to me that he cared in his own little way, you know. This stupid little Viewmaster in a paper bag that meant a lot to me. That was my favorite Christmas.
If you were to write a motto for Belize, it might be, no sweat.
One day, I'm 12 years old, watching this television show about Belize.
If you can't remember where Belize is, you're probably not alone. It's in Central America, all right, just the other side of the Gulf of Mexico.
And we're, you know, tripping on it and loving it, and Dad said, hey, you guys want to go to Belize? And we both look at each other like, is he bullshitting us? Next thing you know, we got passports, got snorkels and fins, loaded up the truck, and headed down to Belize. Belize, it's a beautiful country. The water's turquoise blue and crystal clear. The weather's perfect all the time. Dad bought a boat, the Justin B. And he'd been in the Navy, so he knew a lot of seamanship. We'd take tourists out on day trips, teach people how to spearfish, how to snorkel, how to scuba. Dad would basically turn into this devil-may-care, easygoing character where they would say, yeah, okay, this guy, he's a fucking hippie, I can see that, but at least he's legit. He kept calling us Pirates of the Caribbean. This is before the movies came out. And he was so proud of the fact that he was a pirate of the Caribbean. One day, we pull into Belize City, and I remember this British couple coming down the dock. They had their duffel bags and all their gear. They came on board and said, hello, here we are. I'm Chris. And she's like, hello, I'm Peter Frampton. Nice couple, fairly young, 25. He was a doctor, he said, and she was an attorney, and they were going to be on board for quite a while. A couple weeks, I think.
Dear Mum, we have just set off and the sea is somewhat choppy, so my writing may go haywire. Chris has been doing a lot of sailing.
The sailing's really very good fun, except I think I need a lot more practice at it.
Chris was very fond of sailing, which was a legacy of our holidays in Anglesey.
I always remember he and I just taking the boat out on our own too far, out of the bay, out of sight. But that was Chris pushing boundaries. He did go too far.
Chris was very easygoing, really cool guy, easy to get along with. He was there for the ride. He loved the adventure. He wanted to steer the boat, grab the tiller. We taught him the ropes, literally. Okay, this is how you sail, this is how you navigate. Chris had this giant boom box that he loved. And I was always cranking out some mixtapes that he had from, I guess, recording from his LP collection back home. And playing Pink Floyd or ELO or Santana or whatever. And it was like, yeah, this is groovy. We love this kind of music, you know, and we're dancing on board. It's fun when you have somebody on board that's really into it. I really admired his adventurous spirit. Pita was a little bit more reserved. She would kind of hang back and sun herself or write letters.
During the day, it's super, just lying on the hatches and soaking up the sun whilst the boat flies along. We had a perfect sail. Chris wants me to say this was due to his superb navigation.
I would jump into this beautiful crystal clear water and we'd spearfish. And at the end of the day, I would make a nice meal of rice and beans and whatever we caught. Dad was, oh man, this is awesome. We're sailing, drinking Jamaican rum, partying. This is the life. For every now and again you want to go into port. They would both come in and she would drop off her letters and go shopping. You get tired of a place, you just pull up anchor and go somewhere else.
Doing some coral reef diving on a little island, I suppose I must have seen about 400 different sorts of fish and lots of amazingly coloured coral. The only thing you've got to watch out for is a few sharks, but they shouldn't be too much problem.
They were travelling around, going to all the keys, these little islands off Belize, just lapping it all up really and just really enjoying life.
I can remember I was missing him. The house felt very flat without him. But they'd been snorkeling and swimming and really enjoying the life, so they were happy.
It's incredibly hot here, but at night, the sky is absolutely amazing. There's lightning flashing on the horizon all the time. Just looks beautiful. We've had thunderstorms as well, which is something on a boat.
Since they'd stayed on longer, we got to know them better. Right? You know, we were like a little tight crew, and we all had our jobs to do. So I think they really enjoyed it at first, yeah. I remember that Peta asked, so aren't you going to school? Aren't you missing school? She wanted to volunteer to be our onboard tutor. You know, some knuckleheaded American kids that didn't know nothing, and that was her gift to us, I guess. On board, my dad was the captain, and we were just the crew, and we were obligated to follow his every order. The captain is the god. You follow what the captain says, or it's called mutiny. You had to swab the decks, you had to maintain the paint. This boat would slowly leak, and this ugly, smelly black water would seep in. Every day, if you didn't build, you could eventually sink, so you had to be up on that. It's a life and death thing, you know. We didn't have any radios, no way of communicating, so we were kind of out there on our own. Anything that goes wrong, we're toast. Dad would spend a lot of time getting drunk. He would kind of sulk, and then he would turn into this Jekyll and Hyde type character. Alcohol, whatever it was, would activate this asshole in him. Nothing was ever good enough for him, you know. He would yell at Russ or I, why didn't you tie the knot this way, or why didn't you pull the anchor up this way? It was like a storm that would come in and you weren't prepared for it. You just had to be careful not to cross that line and wake up the dragon or whatever. My dad, you gotta understand, he was a very prolific burglar, breaking into people's houses. He was brought up that way. My grandfather, his father before him, was a criminal, running illegal hooch back in the Prohibition. Whereas maybe a normal dad would teach his kid how to play catch or something. Dad would want me to go breaking into people's houses with them. I didn't want to do it. You know, I wasn't part of that. Dad was pissed off about that. He would say things like, I don't think that you're my son. You can't be my son because you want to be good. You know, you're just too goody-goody. So my nickname was Goody Two-Shoes.
Pete wrote a lesson. The boat was very small. They were all pretty well living on top of one another.
We sleep in the galley, a space about 4 by 5 by 2.5 feet.
Peter was getting a little bit irritated at lack of privacy.
Like all boats, this one has cockroaches. And it's horrible when we turn on the kerosene lamp and they come out. We spray every day, but they come out to die.
First it's paradise, and then after a while it's like, okay, another day, another day, another day. You know, it's like every day you see the same water, you see the same boat, you see the same person. It's like, okay, there's another sunrise, there's another sunset, okay, whatever.
Another reason I wouldn't mind ending my sailing career now is the 2 sons of Dwayne. They're 12 and 13 years, but behave more like 8 and 9. They squabble most of the time, and I find I just have no patience at all with them. What makes it worse is that Dwayne curses and puts them down continually. But on a boat, there's nowhere you can go.
The boys were very quarrelsome. Boston was very angry.
He would put you into a classification of either good people if they were criminals. But if they were law-abiding, those are blue bloods. Fucking blue bloods. He thought that they were looking down on him. And they did. They did look down on him. When things go wrong, little quirks in people's personality get on your nerves, and you can't go anywhere. Where are you going to go? You could tell just by her expression that Peter was a little bit over the novelty of being on board. Not too emotional, stiff upper lip and all that, you know. But there's a little bit of passive aggressiveness, you could tell. I think, yeah, she's kind of done.
June the 29th. Pete wrote that they decided to change their plans and go to Livingston in Guatemala. And then Peter was going to catch a flight to New Orleans, and Chris was going to go on to Trinidad.
Yeah, but we'll be glad to get away, she said. Nothing much happens on a boat.
We had been sailing around different islands, just exploring for a few weeks. Especially Peter was anxious to get off the boat and stretch her legs.
29th of June, 1978. We reached Hunting Key at about 11 a.m. We're docked about 50 yards offshore and the water is perfectly clear.
It was a very beautiful island. I think the name of it was Hunting Key. When we first get there, it's, of course, me and my dad and Russ and Chris and Peter and the lighthouse keeper. And I said, yeah, man, we'll be having a big party here, man, later. Yeah, you're all invited. Come stay, you know, we have a big party. They were having a pig roast. They stuck an apple in his mouth and put it on a spit, and everyone was having roast pig. All the adults were drinking and dancing, and we had the music blaring, and I was like, wow, really? This is cool. was having a good time and smoking pot, doing drugs. Quaaludes were being passed around. There was a lot of debauchery. I remember there was these two very drunk Guatemalan girls. They were beautiful. They're, bikinis, scantily clad, and they were standing in the surf, kissing each other. And I'm like, Russ, look at that. We'd never seen that before, right? Oh my gosh, two girls kissing each other? And then they started taking each other's top off. We're like, oh my God, how far is this gonna go? Dad was drunk and dancing around the bonfire, life of the party. Chris and Peter were having a wonderful time, very drunk and dancing. As she let her hair down and was in the flow of the party. Dad was talking about all these crazy ghost stories. He had smuggled in all of these nitrous oxide cartridges, and he had tossed one of these cartridges in the bonfire. And after a while, they started exploding. Boom, boom. Dad was dancing around like he was conjuring up some kind of magic. It's like, yes, white magic. At that point, I didn't know what was going to happen next.
Peter sent a letter that was dated June the 29th. That was the last we heard from them. The letters stopped. We didn't hear anything at all, and we started to get concerned. It was just that inability to reach out to them. It's hard to think nowadays that you couldn't get in touch with them, but there was just no means of doing so. Every day when the post came, there was a searching for an airmail envelope or some news from them. There was just nothing. By the end of August, we were all very worried. We went to Anglesey on holiday. We came back from Anglesey expecting a letter, but there was nothing there.
We thought, were they unwell? That some sort of accident must have befallen them.
Weeks went by with no word. The last letter was postmarked from Livingston in Guatemala. We knew it was a fairly dangerous place to be, that there was a civil war raging. They had got visas in Belize to go to Honduras, so it was never their intention to go to Guatemala. Our fears just began to grow and grow.
I felt desperate, absolutely desperate, so helpless, really. When Chris was 3, he fell out of the bedroom window to the ground floor. I remember hearing the thud and dashing downstairs. I thought first, of course, he was dead. But actually fell onto a garden table, and that had broken his fall. That's always etched on my memory. You think you've covered every eventuality, such as falling downstairs or, I don't know, being run over, but an open window was nothing that had ever occurred to me. And never forgave myself for that. Now we're missing. You don't know what to do. You don't know who to turn to.
One day I was called into my boss's office in Special Branch at police headquarters. He explained to me how 2 young British people had gone missing in Guatemala and said he would like me to try and find them. The plain fact is that several things could have happened to them. Guatemala were at that time in the middle of a violent civil war. There was serious drug and gang problems there, and large areas of jungle. To all intents and purposes, it's totally lawless. They could have been kidnapped. They could have simply got lost somewhere in the jungle. So now just to keep an absolutely open mind on what might have happened to them.
My father worked for the BBC in Manchester in the news department. He just threw himself into it.
Charles was in contact with newspapers and things.
The couple are Dr. Chris Farmer and his girlfriend, law graduate Peter Frampton, who are both 25. Peter and Chris have been friends since childhood. They even went to the same university. And according to Chris's mother, it was there that the urge to travel the world was born.
It was their one idea that as soon as they graduated, that they would travel as extensively as they could.
It was headline news. Here were these two good-looking young graduates with everything to live for, missing on the other side of the world.
The TV was on. The two of them were missing. It was a terrible shock.
They travelled down through Mexico to Belize, where they hitched a ride on a converted fishing boat owned by an American.
It would be a letter that arrived in the middle of July, but it had been written at the end of June, and there was a gap of about nearly 3 weeks between the writing and the actual posting.
Night after night, my father would sit at the bureau writing letters to anyone he could think of.
We just wrote to every consul down the coast of Central America, Guatemala, Belize.
We started thinking maybe one of them had fallen ill or, they were in jail for something. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office made extensive inquiries. Dad employed a private detective to look at all the tourist haunts along the Belizean coast, Guatemala, Honduras.
We wrote to the harbour master at Hunting Key. We contacted weather stations to see if there'd been any storms. The boat might have been damaged. But all we could do was find any information about what could have happened to Chris and Pete.
I didn't have detectives working for me in the area where they'd gone missing. So I had to rely on the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office. They were already helping Charles Farmer to try and find out what had happened to the pair. But it all drew a blank. However, Charles was a very well-educated, clever man. He'd have made a good detective, actually. He handed over quite a large file of documents from his own inquiries. The most important document that he handed to me was a port document showing the Justin B leaving Belize on the 26th with its captain shown as Dwayne Boston. On board at the time were Christopher, Peter and Boston's two young sons, Vince and Russell. The next we knew from the port record, it sailed into Livingston on the 6th of July, but Christopher and Peter were not aboard.
The harbour master said that he remembered Chris and Pete being signed on this boat, the Justin B. Something had happened to them between Hunting Key and Livingston.
So it was logical that we needed to find out from Boston where they'd left the boat.
It would seem that the key to all this, the key to the mystery of their whereabouts, is the boat owner.
Well, this is what is being hoped for by the police, that they're trying to contact him to actually pin down where he landed them.
We discovered from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office that Boston had left Livingston on July the 19th. He had sold the boat. The next thing we knew was that he had gone back to Sacramento. And then, in October, They interviewed him. He said that he had put them ashore in Guatemala, across the bay from Livingston. He said also that Chris and Peter were drug addicts, drug pushers, that they'd left the boat and that was it.
The skipper of the boat alleged that they were taking drugs at their own request. He had dropped them off at a peninsula, Punta de Manibique, which is largely uninhabited. Why they should drop off at such a remote place struck me as being odd. But Central America at the time was certainly regarded as a major drug smuggling route.
America's public enemy number one is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new, all-out offensive.
Without informing the Greater Manchester Police, the DEA opened a file on Chris and Peter as being suspected drug smugglers. Seemingly the DEA had seen that Chris and Peter had travelled through Morocco, another significant smuggling route, and together with Boston testimony, suspicions were raised.
I mean, yeah, they smoked marijuana, hands up, they did, yeah. You know, they smoked dope. But then I think it wasn't out of the norm in the 70s to smoke joints. Were they drug pushers? No way.
I thought they may have fallen into the hands of villains, maybe been robbed. They could have been arrested by the authorities. You know, where you've got drugs and money, then sadly, police officers can be corrupted.
It became an all-consuming passion for my father, really, to find out what had happened. My parents pleaded with the Foreign Office to interview the boys, but they didn't. So he decided to get the phone number for Boston, and he made a call.
Charles recorded that conversation. The phone rang, and Boston's father answered. He was called Russell Boston.
You're Mr. Russell Boston.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you're the father of Mr. Boston.
Yes.
So obviously, as Dwayne was the last person, I would just like to have a chat with him and ask him just whereabouts and this sort of thing, you see.
Has anyone ever told you to look in Colombia?
In Colombia?
Yes.
Well, you see, the last news we had was that Dwayne had dropped them just short of Livingston.
As they were on dope. He told me, he says, I met hundreds and hundreds of them kind of people down there, and he says some of them would go out on those poppy farms or marijuana farms, and he says they might be out there for a year or two.
You have no address for your son, though?
No, but I can get a hold of him. If you write a letter here, I'll see that he gets the letter.
Sure thing. Many thanks indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I was very suspicious of the responses. I mean, I felt he's hiding something. Why would he hide something? But at the end of the day, Chris and Peter had been missing for months in a country like Guatemala. Boston and his two sons had disappeared. There was no evidence that he had committed a crime. And the truth of the matter, what I could do was very limited, because we had absolutely no jurisdiction in the matter.
Inquiries have so far produced nothing.
Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. From the time that the last letter was written, just an utter blank.
All that both families can do is wait and wonder what has happened to Peter and Chris.
Any news would have been better than no news. As a family, we couldn't come to terms with anything, really, not knowing where they were. We were in limbo.
What were you going through, Audrey?
Hell. In a word. I don't know. How can you describe it? I just remember looking up at the stars and thinking, is there no sign of anything, any reason, or you just think that surely there'll be some sign or somebody who must have seen them. Couldn't imagine what we were about to find out.
My father took the phone call. He just crumpled, really. Yeah, just didn't really cry, just crumpled. Back in July of the previous year, 2 bodies had been discovered floating 200 metres off the peninsula at Punta de Manabique. And they'd been buried unidentified. They'd been found with obvious signs of torture, and Peter's body had a plastic bag over her head.
I remember I was at work at the clinic, and when the police rang up and said that it was Chris and Pete. And I can remember driving back from the clinic and shouting to the empty car, my son has been murdered, my son has been murdered. And then the next day, I went back to work as normal.
That was it, that was the end. They were not coming back.
This was a whole new ball game. This was now a murder. They had died from asphyxia due to submersion. In other words, they were drowned. They were bound hand and foot, and they were attached to pieces of heavy machinery on the seabed.
I was very, very angry. I really was. We wanted justice.
We were all grieving in our own individual ways, but one question was in all our heads, just the question, why? It just didn't make sense. It didn't add up. What could possibly have gone so wrong? Why were these 2 kids tortured and murdered?
All I can do is tell the story of what I saw in front of my own eyes. To tell the truth as I remember it.
you.